Hi everybody, it's MallowCat here. It's been a while, and I thought that now would be a good time to sit down and have a bit of a more serious discussion. And I want to preface this by saying it's okay sometimes to not be okay, even during times where everybody tells you that you should be at your happiest. And to an extent, some of that is entirely normal, but it's very important to know when you need to ask for help. And there's no shame in asking for that help, because sometimes we all just need a little helping hand up. So, with that being said, today I am going to be talking about the topic of prenatal depression. And there are going to be references to things like thoughts of self-termination and self-harm. And I want to let you know that I am okay. I am not in any danger from myself or others. And the reason that I'm not in any danger is because I saw some signs in myself that were concerning, and I reached out for help. So, with that said, this being a more serious video, it is a fair bit more scripted than usual. I'm going to start by talking about my own experience, and then maybe talking a little bit more in general what to look for if you think that you might be struggling, and when to know that you might also need to reach out for help. There have been a lot of people opening up about postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, and that's really important. And this is not to take away from that discussion, but rather to add to it, because knowing my own personal mental health history, I knew as soon as I became pregnant in January that I was in a risk group for postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, because depression and anxiety is something that I have I've been in this dance most of my life, on and off, and previous mental health struggles can play a part in these things. But I had never heard of the concept of prenatal depression or prenatal anxiety until I mentioned my concerns to my care providers, and I found out that the struggle is valid and there is help. And, it makes sense that this would be something common. Your body's changing. You're about to undergo a major life upheaval. Your hormones are doing strange things. Everything about pregnancy, especially when it's your first pregnancy, is very strange and new. And the brain doesn't tend to like strange and new. And there is a saying that just because something is common doesn't mean it's normal. And that's not to say there's anything bad about it. It's outside of your control. but rather that means that when symptoms fall outside that range of normal, it's time to talk to somebody about it, to get help. And I've I've rambled a little bit here, but I really do want to express that needing help doesn't mean that you've failed. It doesn't mean you're going to be a bad parent. It just means that you need to be aware of these things so that you can start feeling better and so that you can become your usual self again and be the person that you can be the parent that you can be. And that's terrifying, especially when people are telling you you're being dramatic. It's just your hormones. You just need to relax. You should be happy about this. But if you are in that dark place, don't listen to those people. Because it is extremely important that you do ask for that help. It's the best thing you can do for yourself and for your baby. And I very much wanted to be pregnant. Um, I have wanted children for a very long time. And so my journey to becoming pregnant has been long and difficult in the first place. And that is also a risk factor for prenatal depression. I had a number of health issues that were caused by medical neglect at the hands of doctors who, frankly, never should have gotten their licenses. I've had cancer scares, I've had multiple uterine biopsies, surgeries, and the hardest part of it all was aggressive pharmaceutical intervention because the medical neglect that I experienced led to a premature ovarian failure, which luckily we were able to stimulate my body back into having a regular cycle and ovulating properly with the use of letrozole, which is an aromatase inhibitor. What it does is it helps your body to produce less estrogen. And that sounds weird, but what can happen in polycystic ovary syndrome, and the reason that the ovaries fail is because there's too much estrogen in the system and you stop producing progesterone. And progesterone's job is to ramp up until ovulation, build up the uterine lining, and then drop after ovulation if you haven't conceived. And that's what triggers the menstrual cycle. That's what triggers menstruation. And without the estrogen dropping before the progesterone ramps up, you don't produce enough luteinizing hormone, which is what causes the egg within the ovary to mature and release. And so my ovaries couldn't do that, and they sort of went dormant for a lot of my early adulthood. Even with treatment with letrozole, I suffered several early losses, what they call chemical pregnancies, where you get a positive pregnancy test, but for some reason the pregnancy does not continue long enough to be medically considered pregnant. And the horrible part of this is that medically, this is not considered to be a pregnancy loss. So the resources that would have been available if I had had a loss a little bit later, say after 6 weeks, were not available to me. I didn't have access to the same grief counseling therapy options to help me get through it. I was on my own, and that, again, is a risk factor. And I'll explain why a little bit later. Right now, I want to focus on my personal experience with prenatal depression and just see if it resonates with anybody else. So, New Year's Day, January 1st, 2023, I saw 2 lines on a pregnancy test, and they were very strong lines. I had never seen the test line on a pregnancy test strip so dark. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew somehow that this was different. I was going to have a healthy pregnancy. I just knew I was finally not going to lose one. And for a few weeks, that stayed the same. I stayed in this very positive, uplifted mental state. I was making appointments. I started looking for a care provider, an OB or a midwife. I even announced to friends and family, even though I was out so early. I just knew that this was the one. It was finally going to stick. And then one night, while I was laying in bed, trying to go to sleep, it all came crashing down around me. I started worrying about anything and everything. I couldn't sleep, and it progressively got worse. It was very sudden for me, but sometimes it's more gradual. Even when I wasn't throwing up everything I ate, I didn't want to eat. I couldn't sleep, as I said earlier. And every time I thought about being pregnant and tried to find something positive about my situation, there was something in my mind that was asking, but what if it dies again? What if it's not real? What if, because of the doctor shortage where we live, I never find a doctor to take over my prenatal care? What happens after 20 weeks when the walk-in clinic can no longer see me, when I need to have an OB or a midwife looking after me and dealing with these things? And some of these were very valid worries, knowing that I had had several losses already, and there is a doctor shortage. Every maternity care provider within driving distance of where I'm living had been full for September deliveries from the time that they reopened after the New Year's holiday on January 3rd. When I first started calling at 9 a.m. on January 3rd, they were full for the entire month of September. And that didn't make sense to me because it was so early. How were people who were just finding out they were pregnant already out of luck for finding a care provider? There was no way that anybody who was due in September could have found out any earlier than I had. But such is life when there aren't enough doctors to go around. And I can't blame anybody for this situation. except for maybe the bureaucrats and the health authorities that have absolutely neutered our healthcare system and have made it almost impossible to open a new practice or to stay in practice in this city or any of the surrounding cities. But even with the valid worries, there were others that were entirely unfounded. I convinced myself for almost a week at one point that I had imagined the second line. So I was testing every day to make sure that I wasn't hallucinating. Every day for that whole week, I was just retesting, sometimes up to 4 or 5 times a day, just to make sure that I wasn't crazy. And just kept going. And around 8 weeks pregnant, we had the first ultrasound. And I was finally able to accept that it was real, that the baby was real. But that only opened up a further can of worms for my brain. And the things that my brain kept repeating to me were, it's going to die like all the others did. It's already dead. The medical officers are keeping you away from care on purpose because they know that you're going to be a bad mom. The universe wants your child to die. And finally, the universe wants you to die. And that's when I really realized that something was wrong. I had already talked to the doctor at the walk-in clinic and told her that I had a history of mental health problems and I wanted to be put into contact with a counselor who specialized in postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety because I was at risk. And luckily, she was a younger doctor and she had the foresight to refer me to a program that would also allow me to access my counselor while I was still pregnant. Looking back on it, I think she could see some signs of the anxiety starting even before I did. Even during that very first appointment when I met her for the first time. And it's going to get dark here. But because she made the decision to put me into contact with a counselor before I even knew I needed one, I still have a baby. It was when I was about 12 weeks pregnant that there was a mix-up at the pharmacy regarding some diabetes medication. And this horrible mix-up, along with some uncontrolled pain from a shoulder injury, because you can't take anything that actually works for pain when you're pregnant. You can't even take ibuprofen. The only thing that is safe is Tylenol, acetaminophen, paracetamol. They're all the same thing. But that's the only thing that is safe when you're pregnant for pain. I couldn't have ibuprofen. I couldn't even use topical creams like Voltaren because any anti-inflammatory can get into the bloodstream and can cross the placenta and harm the fetus. So between the uncontrolled pain and the growing depression and anxiety, this pharmacy mix-up sent me over the edge. And I became convinced right at that moment that the universe wanted my baby to die. And maybe the universe even wanted me to die. So I was alone in the mall elevator, just myself and my partner, and I started crying. And I told my partner that I wanted to schedule a D&C. And knowing how much I wanted to be pregnant and how hard we had worked to make it happen, my partner pretty much begged me not to make that kind of decision while I was clearly in some sort of emotional or mental health crisis. And they were right, but I couldn't see that at the time. I was so sure that the only proper and correct decision to make was to terminate the pregnancy and then myself. But luckily, it was really late in the evening by this point, and so none of the medical offices that could have made the referral um, for an abortion were open at this time of night. And so it took some doing. It took a few hours of conversation once we got home, but my partner did convince me to wait a week and see if the pharmacy mix-up could be resolved and just wait for the first appointment with my therapist before I made any kind of permanent decision. And looking back on it, I think perhaps going to the psychiatric emergency room would have been a prudent option, but also I've been treated very poorly there in the past. And that's a story for another time, but suffice to say that I've gone there for severe anxiety attacks, not even planning to self-terminate, and come out wanting to do exactly that. They've made the situation worse rather than better more than once. And so I don't feel that the outcome would have been any better if I had gone to the psychiatric emergency room. In fact, it may have been a worse outcome. Um, I have no way of knowing at this point, but anyway, the pharmacy mix-up was corrected. I did get my diabetes medication, and more importantly, I had that first appointment with my therapist. And we identified that I had prenatal anxiety, but I wasn't ready to talk about the depression yet. But I think she could tell that I wasn't as okay as I was saying I was, because I got a second appointment very shortly after. And that was when she asked me if I'd ever heard of prenatal depression. And that's when things really changed. Everyone talks about what a wonderful, wonderful thing pregnancy is and how a wanted pregnancy is the best thing that can happen to you. And in most cases, they're not wrong. A wanted pregnancy is a wonderful thing, and I'm so happy to be having my child. But it's hard. Your brain can force you into those dark places that you don't want to be in. And sometimes those places are darker than regular clinical depression, which I'm also unfortunately very intimately familiar with. And it's terrifying. It's the scariest thing that I have ever been through. I was really not okay for a while. And some days I'm still not okay. But there's help. And it does get better. And you don't have to suffer. Your first line of defense when it comes to prenatal depression and anxiety is always going to be therapy. Sometimes it's enough to bring you back around and pull you out of the shadows. In my case, I got very lucky with my therapist. She's not only got a specialty in perinatal mental health, she also has years and years of experience with neurodivergent clients. And she was able to give me tools to pull myself out of that place mostly by myself. I also took a provincial healthcare funded meditation and mindfulness class, which also helped giving me tools I could use to keep myself grounded in reality. And, it hasn't been perfect. Most days I'm mostly at an emotional equilibrium of sorts. I can tell mostly where I am. I'm not fully out of those haunted woods yet. The shadows are still lurking in the back of my mind, and they want to pull me back in with them. But for now, I can fight it. And if it gets to the point where I can't fight it anymore, there are safe medications to use in pregnancy. There are SSRIs and a few other classes of medications that can be used that have been tested for prenatal depression. And there are risks with any medication, but these have proven mostly safe. So I'm still waiting to hear back regarding a referral to perinatal psychiatry. Just in case I do need medication later, I just want to be able to have access to someone who can help me make the right call if it does become necessary. But right now I feel like I am at least at equilibrium, even if I'm not fully out of the hole, so to speak. I have been on medications for my mental health before, and there's no shame in it. You do what you have to do. Sometimes life just gives you a broken brain and a lifetime of trauma, then you have to try to deal with that. And there's nothing wrong with a bit of pharmaceutical help if you can access it. And at this point, my first priority is keeping my child safe and healthy. And that means that I have to do what it takes to keep myself safe and healthy. Even if my brain is trying to tell me that I should be doing the opposite of that. But yeah. If you've clicked on this video, you're probably not here just to listen to some weird cat girl on the internet talk about personal experiences. I do hope that I've helped someone out there feel less alone. But now I want to talk a little bit more clinically. What are the things to look out for? How do you know you may need to seek help? Aside from the very obvious things like thoughts of harming yourself or your unborn baby, like, I don't want anybody to have to get to that point in the first place. It's not a fun mindset to be in, especially when it's a wanted pregnancy. So let's talk about that. I think looking back on it, the first thing I would have noticed if I'd known better is probably the constant thought and worry that my baby was already dead or was about to die or something was horribly wrong, even though I had all the evidence from blood work and ultrasounds and medical reports to tell me otherwise. According to the Mayo Clinic, excessive anxiety and paranoia about the pregnancy is one of the main diagnostic criteria for prenatal depression, along with feelings of inadequacy, excessive questioning of your ability to parent, lack of self-esteem, basically. It's very common to clinical depression, this lack of self-esteem, but in pregnancy it tends to focus on thoughts about parenting, Things like, I'm not going to be good enough. I won't be able to take care of my child. What if I don't love my child? That's the thing. Is in prenatal depression, it focuses around the pregnancy, the child, being a parent. Some thoughts like this are totally normal. It's okay to worry. But when it becomes your primary focus and you start to lose joy and you really start seriously questioning yourself and you can't talk yourself out of it, that's when it's time to seek help. Also, losing interest and pleasure in things you used to enjoy is a major warning sign. You may have noticed in my case, I haven't streamed or posted any YouTube videos in several weeks now. I kept telling everybody I just don't have the energy, prenatal exhaustion, pregnancy fatigue. Those are real things, and I don't want to downplay them. But that was only part of the story for me. I am exhausted a large part of the time. Like, don't get me wrong, I had to quit caffeine for the most part, and I used to be a several cups of coffee a day kind of cat. Um, but now I get to have one cup of coffee if I'm lucky. Um, so it was hard for me to tell the difference between caffeine withdrawal and pregnancy exhaustion and the type of lack of motivation that comes with being clinically depressed. But I realized looking back on it that at least half of my lack of energy has simply been that streaming and making content not only stopped bringing me the joy that it used to, I felt like I didn't deserve any joy that it would bring me. And that's really the rub there. It's not only that it doesn't bring you joy or it feels exhausting when you feel like you don't deserve that joy, but somebody else deserves it more. It sounds ridiculous saying it out loud, but that feeling is real, and it's a warning sign. Um, other symptoms that can come up are what the Mayo Clinic refers to as poor response to reassurance. And I did notice that as well. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe people when they told me everything was going to be fine and I'm going to be a good parent, that I'm loved and wanted and the baby is healthy. I literally couldn't process and internalize that message. I wanted to hear and accept it, but I couldn't. And every time I heard those reassurances, something in my own brain would just respond back. They're telling you what you want to hear. They've always told you what you want to hear. None of this is true. They're just telling you what you want to hear so that you'll shut up and stop being so dramatic. So, spoiler alert, they weren't just telling me what I wanted to hear. It was true. The baby is healthy. The baby is loved. I'm loved. And it's all going to be okay in the end. But I couldn't hear it at the time. Another big warning sign that luckily I didn't experience, but is very common, is refusal or inability to adhere to prenatal care routines, keeping appointments, taking your vitamins and medications, avoiding alcohol and drugs. I've been pretty good at keeping to prenatal care routines, but I feel like some of that also is a little bit of obsession. I feel like if I can't do anything right, at least I can keep my appointments. At least I can remember to take my vitamins. At least I can remember my medications. At least I can do this and that. Like, you know. And so I feel like this could go either way. Either you become obsessed with good prenatal care because you feel like that's all you can do. And if you can't do anything else right, at least you can do that. Or you become so depressed that you just can't. Um, so yeah. um, anyway, March of Dimes is another good resource, and they cite sleep disturbances. And they're very careful to note that this can go either way. Some people like me have a very difficult time sleeping despite feeling tired all the time. But then an equal number of people report sleeping significantly more than normal, even when accounting for how exhausting it is to be growing a person inside you. So if you have any combination of these symptoms, or even if you have one of the more severe signs like paranoia or thoughts of hurting yourself or your baby, it's probably time to reach out and ask for help. Talk to your care providers. If finances are a barrier to seeking counseling or psychiatric care, your doctor or midwife might be able to refer you to programs that can help pay for those things. And I promise, those programs exist for people like you. You will not be taking away from someone else by using these assistance programs. There is no what if someone else is more deserving in these situations, because you are deserving. You have the right and the responsibility to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe and healthy. And more importantly than that, when the people who need these programs don't use them, the programs lose funding. And that's what really takes away from the people who need them. Use the programs that are available to you. Get the help. I promise those programs exist for you and people like you. I promise. And it's not just important for your own mental health to seek help if you need it, because here's the real rub with all this. There are complications for your baby that can come from untreated prenatal depression. According to March of Dimes and the National Institute of Mental Health in the United States, prenatal depression is associated with preterm birth, small size for gestational age, significantly low birth rate, heart defects, post-birth irritability and lack of activity, ongoing learning and behavioral problems, developmental delays, mental health problems for your child later in life, and decreased milk supply. If you plan to breastfeed, you might not be able to if you don't treat your prenatal depression. So, if you're struggling, it's not only okay to seek help, it's necessary. You and your baby deserve the best. And most importantly, I know you need to hear this because I needed to hear this from somebody. So listen real carefully, okay? Come here. Get real close. And listen. Internalize this. I believe you. I believe in you, and I know you can do this. With the right help, you can get through it. It seems like a lot right now, and it is. It is a lot. But you can get through this. There's a better day coming, and it's okay to need help getting to that day. I want you to get that help. I want to see you come out the other side of this safe and happy and healthy. If you can't do it for yourself, do it for your baby. Do it for me. I hope that this has helped someone, even only one person, know that they're not alone and they can get through this. I don't personally know most of the people who will watch this video, but I do love you anyway. We're all stuck on this rock together, and we're not getting off it anytime soon. So we've got to help each other make it through the hard times the best we can. I'll put a few links down in the description below to March of Dimes, Mayo Clinic, and the National Institutes of Mental Health, just to give some more resources and hopefully help people identify if they may have prenatal depression and anxiety, and maybe gives you some more resources as to where to find help. So, as always, until next time, because there will be a next time. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay weird.